Okay, welcome everyone. Nice to see you again after a few week break. This is a little bit of a milestone for us, or at least for me, because as I was preparing the sources, I went to save the file, and the file is saved in a folder of classes and Parsha Insights Behaalotecha, and it said, "Do you want to replace the previous Parsha Insights Behaalotecha?" Which means that we've gone through a full cycle of these classes, and in fact, we've gone even 2 weeks past. 2 weeks ago, we started Parsha Bamidbar of 2020, and here we are in Behaalotecha of 2021. And anyway, good to be here, and thank you all for joining us for this wonderful journey. It's been very, very meaningful for me as well to prepare these classes and to share these thoughts with you, which thankfully are not my own thoughts. These are thoughts of people much greater than I could ever dream of being. The Chasam Sofer, Rav Hirsch. It's been a great opportunity to get inside the minds and insights of these 19th century greats. So we're going to really wanted to focus on one comment of the Chatam Sofer, which is not found in his commentary on the Torah, but rather is found in a book of drashot. The Chatam Sofer, there are many different. He wrote a tremendous amount, and a good amount also was compiled by his children, particularly his two eldest sons, after his both during his life and after his passing. And so we have what's known as the drashot of the Chatam Sofer, in which he addresses an issue in our Torah portion, which we'll get to right now. There we go. So Moshe, Vayomer, let's jump right in. Vayomer Moshe lechovav ben Ruel Hamidyani choten Moshe. So Moses basically speaking to his father-in-law, but interestingly, we know his father-in-law as Yitro, but here he is called to two other names, Chovav, the son of Reuel, both of which are going to be understood as names of Yitro himself. Nosim anachnu. So what does Moses say? And we're going to deal with how Rashi explains these names, how Yitro has so many different names. Nosim anachnu. We're traveling. El hamakom asher amar Hashem oto etein lachem. The place that God said, I'm going to give it to you. Lecha itanu. Come with us, Yitro. Jethro, dear father-in-law, join us. Vehetavnu lach, and we'll be good to you. Ki Adonai diber tov al Yisrael, for God has promised to be generous to Israel. So what's happening here? Very simple. Moshe is saying to his father-in-law, hey, we're on the border of the land of Israel. Join us, won't you? Come with us. Vayomer elav, Yitro says, lo elech, I'm not going to go with you. Ki'im el artzi, the only place I'm going is my own country. Vel moladati, to my own birthplace, elech. That's where I'm going to go. By the way, you think Moshe got along well with his father-in-law? Remember, he said, number one, he says to his father-in-law, come with us. I want to spend some more time with you. Join us on our journey. That's indication, number one, that there was great love. Number two, Moshe asks his father-in-law to do something. What does his father-in-law say? No, I'm not going to do it. He demurs. He deflects. He avoids. Who does this remind you of? Moshe, right? Moshe, when asked to be the spokesperson of the people, when asked to lead, no, I can't do it. No. So both of them are kind of reluctant to take the next step of the journey. And then Moses says, Vayomer, don't leave us. So as you know where we should camp in the wilderness, you could be, dear father-in-law, you could be our eyes. It'll be good to you. The same good that God is giving to us will be good to you. So and we don't know that this is the end of that section. Whether he goes, whether he doesn't go, that's not important. What's happening here is that Moshe says to his father-in-law, please come with us. Please, please come with us. His father-in-law says no, and then Moshe persists. So what questions do we have? Any at first glance, any difficulties with this? Any difficulties with this particular passage? There's one glaring difficulty, one issue that's very present, and if you know the rest of the story, it's fairly obvious, and that is, what does Moshe say? Moshe says to his father-in-law, "Come with us." Who's us? Where's Moshe going? He's saying, come to the land of Israel with us. But who doesn't go to the land of Israel? Moshe. So what's happening there? Right? And the commentators, it's a fair, I think it's a good question. And the commentators deal with that. We're going to look at two opinions right now. So Rashi says, number one, Chovav. Who is this Chovav? This is Yitro, the same person, because we have another verse who calls Chotein Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe, Chovav. And what does it mean when the verse says that they went to Ruel, their father? It means that the Tinokot, that children call their father Abba, right? And V'shemot Harbe Hayulo, he had a lot of different names. Yitro comes from the word Yoter, right? More and more. Sheyiter Parasha Achat BaTorah, because he added a whole section to the Torah. Chovav comes from the word to love, right? My yeshiva in New York, my rabbinical school, is called Yeshivat Chovavei Torah. Chovavei comes from the word to love. From the Hebrew word chiba is also, chiba is love. So al chibev et haTorah, because he loved the Torah. He loved the Torah. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the name. So here's the issue. Come with us to the place, miyad. Ad shlosha yamim anach nichnasim la'aretz. We're going to go within 3 days, right? This is the beginning of the trip. Shev masah ze harishon nasu al manat likanes la'eretz Yisrael. Because this first stretch of when they were leaving Egypt and going and getting the Torah and then going straight to the land of Israel, right? That's what it was supposed to be. Ela shechatu b'mitonanim, but we're going to read also about the complaint, about the sin of the complainers. Umipnei ma shitef, and where Moshe, remember, he strikes the rock and is punished to not go into the land of Israel. But this is happening before that. So Umipnei ma shitef Moshe atzmo imahem shadayin lo nigzara gzera alav, because the decree had not yet happened. Uchsavor shehu nichnas, and he thought he was going in. So to answer the question, how could Moshe invite his father-in-law to come with him into the land? The answer is Moshe at this point thought he too was going into the land of Israel. He thought that was going to be his destiny as well. And look at the Chizkuni, what the Chizkuni says, a different approach. He says, he quotes Rashi, and then he said, well, look in the English. He quotes Rashi. According to Rashi, Moshe invites Yitro to become a partner in the land because Moshe believes that he and the people are on their way immediately to enter. But then he cites a proof that Moshe already really knew that he wasn't going to go into the land. So according to the plain meaning of what Moses is saying here to his father-in-law, he included himself. He reasoned that if the people were to know that the man who had taken them out of Egypt and performed all the miracles would not be allowed to enter the Holy Land, what possible chance would an ordinary Israelite have to ever get into that land? So what Moshe was doing was he was suppressing the information. He was saying, yeah, I know I'm not going to go in, but I'm not going to come public with that. I'm not going to let because it's going to defeat my purpose as a leader. So I'm not going to disclose that to the people because they're going to say, well, if the leader's not going in, then we're not going in. Then what point is there for us to schlep along on this trip? And therefore, I'm going to hold back that information. It's a very interesting approach to leadership and to transparency and truth, that Moshe is walking around with this knowledge that he will not lead them into the land, and yet is not disclosing that knowledge out of fear for what it will do to the people. Okay. Any questions before we jump into the Chatam Sofer on this very issue, on why Moshe wants his father-in-law to be in the land? Okay. So yeah, Esther.
Is it possible he wants his father-in-law to maybe take over along with the rest of the leaders, and sort of provide a continuum between his leadership and what's coming, when he knows that he...
It could be, and I don't know in the chronology when Joshua comes in as the heir apparent, but it would be strange to go back a generation in terms of leadership, for him to appoint his wife's father as the next leader, who, by the way, is not an Israelite, right? He's a Midianite priest,
Right,
who converts at a certain point. We don't know if we're at that point or not at that point yet. But that would be an unusual move for him to go back, to kick it back a generation.
but I'm not suggesting that his father-in-law would be the appointed leader, but just that he would be, for the next leaders, some kind of a connecting force between what came and what's coming.
Yeah, it could be. He wants him there to serve that function of continuity, to be the bridge between him and the next.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very real possibility. Yeah, very good. The Chatam Sofer is going to take it a little bit different direction, but we have to look at two verses or two sections first in the prophets before we get to the Chatam Sofer, because in these two verses, we're going to see what he sees as an inherent contradiction. And that is in the verse in Jeremiah, says, such is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel, acharei hayamim hahem, after these days. So we're talking about an ideal now. We're talking about a vision. We're talking about perhaps even Yemot HaMashiach, the Messianic times. So what's going to happen? I will place my teaching into their inmost being and inscribe it upon their hearts. You know what's going to happen in these better times is that the Torah is going to be in our hearts. Then I will be their God, they shall be my people. No longer will they need to teach one another, right? Velo yilamdu od ish et re'ehu, right? This is the messianic ideal. Everyone has achieved that level of understanding, of knowledge. They're not going to need to teach each other and to say to one another, heed the Lord, listen to God, for all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall heed me, declares the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquities and remember their sins no more. So the prophet says, no more learning, because everyone will have achieved a high level of understanding, right? So that's what we're going to focus on. Velo yilamdu od ish et re'ehu. We won't teach each other anymore because we'll all be at the heights of wisdom. Okay, so we're going to look, that's Jeremiah. Isaiah also prophesying about these future times and perhaps about Yemot HaMashiach, the Messianic times. And Isaiah says, in the days to come, V'haya ba'acharit hayamim, right? In the end of days, in the days to come, the mount of the Lord's house shall stand firm above the mountains and tower above the hills, and all the nations shall gaze on it with joy. And the many people shall go and say, come, let us go up to the mount of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. So who's saying this? The many peoples, the other nations, that he may instruct us in his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. You know this song, you know these words. Out of Zion shall go forth the Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. So you have two sections. One says no teaching whatsoever. Everyone will know everything. And the other says people are going to come to learn. So what is it? What's the answer? Well, the answer is it's differentiating between the Jewish people who are returning to the land and achieving these ideals of knowledge, and the other nations that are then going to be drawn to and going to need to learn. And look at what the Chassam Sofer says in one of his drashot. He says, "V'nirali kach." It appears to me thus. Delatid lavo. In the future, it says, or concerning the future, Ki kulam yadu oti lemiktanam ad gedolam, right? That all will know me. It was right here. All kulam yadu oti miktanam, all will know me from the least to the greatest. V'nirali mikol makom lo yitbatel mitzvat v'limadatem et benechem. There won't be, in any event, they won't have to cancel the concept of you shall teach your children. Ki al kol panim yitkayim etzel talmidim, because they're still going to have students. V'hainu me'umot ha'olam. That's going to be the nations of the world. Ha'omrim l'chu v'nelcha beit elokei Yaakov, where the verse came from here. They're going to say, we're going to go up and we're going to ascend to the mount of God, to the house of the God of Jacob, in order that they teach v'yorenu, from the word Torah, from teaching, me'orchotav, from his ways, from his paths. So the Chasam Sofer says, you're going to have a problem because we have a mitzvah. The mitzvah is v'limadatem et benechem. You shall teach your children. That's a mitzvah. And you're telling me in Messianic times there's going to be no teaching? So how am I going to fulfill the mitzvah of teaching? Because we're still going to have the nations of the world who are going to need to learn, because they won't know otherwise. And that's part of the condition of the Messianic times, is that we'll have new students. Those students will be people who come in from the outside. Okay? Now, he's going to connect this to our parasha. And he says in a different, in the same drasha, just a few pages later, Ki ikar tovato shel adam. The essential goodness of man, lahativ la'achrine, is to do good for others. Ulamed da'at la'acherim, and to teach knowledge to others. Think about that statement for a moment. The essential good of a person is to make the life of another better by sharing wisdom and insight. Ulatid lavo, and in the future, and then he quotes the verses, Yihye ikar tovatenu, what's going to be the essence of our goodness? Lamed im umot ha'olam, to teach the nations of the world. Asher yavo, and they come and they say, come, let's go and teach from the paths. Vihine, Moshe Rabbeinu, alav hashalom, Moses, chashav az sheyavor et Yarden. He thought he was going to pass over the Jordan and he was going to go into the land of Israel. V'i haya nichnas le'eretz Yisrael, haya az olam hatikun. If he would come into the land of Israel, it would be a perfect place. Vayu kulam yodim et Hashem, everyone would know God. Al kain, therefore, bikesh meyitro sheyelech imahem. He wanted Jethro, he wanted Yitro to come with them. Kadesh yelehem ger tzedek, so that they would have a proselyte, a righteous proselyte, sheyuchlu lahativimo, that they could improve his life, v'lamda orchot Hashem, to teach him the ways of God. They needed Yitro to be there to have someone to teach and build up and do good for. And he quotes a proof text to that in that sense. And by the way, what he's getting this from, perhaps, I brought the next source is the Megala Amukos. And the Megala Amukos, which means the one who reveals the deep secrets. He says, you want to know why Moshe didn't go into the land of Israel and build the holy temple? Because if Moshe builds a temple, God can't destroy that temple. You want to know why King David wasn't the one who built the temple? Because if King David builds the temple, God can't destroy that temple. And what happens when God can't destroy the temple? Look at what he writes. V'nimsa ilu haya nichnas Moshe le'eretz Yisrael. If Moses had entered the land, v'nivneh hamikdash al yado, and the Beit Hamikdash, the holy temple, was built by him. Lo hayu hasonim lishlot b'maasei yadav. Our enemies would not be able to conquer what he made, the temple of Moses. V'haya muchrach, and what then would have happened? Lishpoch chamato al Yisrael. God would have had to pour out the wrath, not on the building, but on the people. V'lo al eitzim va'avanim, and not on eitzim, wood and stones, not on the building material. Right? That's part of the blessing. Tisha B'Av is partially a holiday as well, because there's a sense of gratitude. Thank you, God, for taking out your wrath on things and not on people. Thank you, God, for when you thought that we were worthy of destruction, for having chosen to take down the Beit HaMikdash and not having to take down the people. It's not to say that the people didn't suffer, and not to say that you can apply this logic in all different cases, because people suffer a great deal. But this is perhaps where the idea is coming from, where the Chasam Sofer is coming from, about when Moses enters the land. The idea that Moses has about the land he'll enter is that when he goes into the land, that everything will be perfect. Everyone will know what they need. No one will need to learn anything. And so he's inviting Yitro. The Chasam Sofer says he's inviting his father-in-law Yitro in order to have someone, or multiple people like him, or if he came with an entourage, to have people to teach, to lift up. I think it's a very beautiful idea of that no one should find themselves in a place where there's no one there to help, right? That if we seclude ourselves into only being with like-minded people who our ideas can't benefit, then what are we doing? You have to teach. We need to teach. That's part of the essence of the good of humanity. Any comments on this? We're going to develop this just one step further.
I just wanted to understand if this Megale Amukot, is that the Chatam Sofer or another?
No, that's not the Chatam Sofer. That's an early Hasidic work.
Okay.
That is a student of, it's Rav Nassan Nata Shapiro. I'm sorry, it's not it's Rav Nassan Nata Shapiro, and this is a 17th century work from Poland. But I'm blanking on the relation. He was a student of Rav Meir Lublin. Anyway, I'll look it up. The Megala Lukos is a classic work, and it deals with issues of Kabbalah. I have a copy on my shelf right here, but it deals with Kabbalistic issues as well.
I find it kind of a stretch. The argument. It doesn't convince me. It looks like it's a reaching for some rationale that seems invented.
In terms of the father-in-law issue, or is that what you're talking about?
No, in terms of God, how God's destruction would fall on the people rather than stones and wood.
Correct, and this is very much a Kabbalistic influence. Absolutely. I mean, he's dealing with very spiritual concepts that a building built by Moses or David could never be destroyed. Right? There is a spiritual leap of logic that has to be taken in order to accept that those buildings could not be destroyed, but the building of King Solomon is destroyed, or that a regular building is destroyed. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. One more step is just that in Parshat Balak, the prophet Bilam, in his very poetic cursing, blessing the people, he says, Kilo Nachash b'Yakov. Nachash comes from it's augury here, but it's Nachash from the Hebrew Lenachesh is to guess, but it's like a type of sorcery. Velo Kesem b'Yisrael. There's no divining. There's no magic in Israel. Ka'et Yamer liYakov. This is all poetic, very poetic. So Jacob is told at once, and Israel, Uli Yisrael, Ma Pa'al El. Right, what God has planned. Israel is told what God has planned. That's part of what the prophet says in his attempted curse, the ultimate blessing of the people. And look at what Rashi says. Rashi says, ka'et. What's at once or at the time? At the time it will be said to Jacob. What at the time? Rashi says, Od atid liyot et. Will be a time in the future. Ka'et hazot. Like this time, asher tigalech hibatan le'ein kol, in which the love of God will be apparent to everyone. Shehein, this is talking about messianic times. This is talking about times in the future. Shehein yoshvin lefanav, that all will sit before God. Ulemedim Torah mipiv, and learn Torah from God. Right? We're all going to learn Torah from God. Same question that the Chasam Sofer asked about, the prophet, about Jeremiah, about not teaching each other, is going to apply here. So if we're all learning Torah from God, here's the logic, right? The logic is that we need to teach in order to be good. The goodness of our lives is in our ability to lift up others. And if that's true, what happens if there's no one else to lift up? What happens if we're all just sitting there learning from God? Who's going to teach whom? What does that look like? Umechitzatam lifnim, and their place, the place of the righteous, is going to be closer or inward, mimalachei hasharet, that we're going to be sitting around God, and the angels are going to be behind us. They're going to be in the back rows, and we're going to be in the front row, and we're going to be learning, and the angels are going to say, Ma pa'al el, what has God done? What is God doing? What's going on? So what Rashi is saying is that in the future, the people, the righteous, are going to be teaching angels. Right? That in the land of Israel, the idea, if there's no one around you to teach, find someone to teach. Bring somebody in. Import a student. Bring in Yitro. Bring in the father-in-law. In the future, even if there's no one else to teach, the angels are going to need to learn. We're going to be teaching. Humans are going to be teaching the angels. It's a radical concept. But all of this comes down to the essential need to learn and to teach. It's very powerful. Very powerful. And I wanted to share and really close with this. One thing which I think opens this up in terms of understanding the Chasam Sofer. And where is this coming from? Where are these ideas of the essence of the good of a person is to teach? So there's a little known work, it's about 4 pages long, called the Pituchei Chotam, which is written by Rav Shimon Sofer, who was the Chasam Sofer's son. Now, keep in mind that in the last years of the Chasam Sofer's life, he was married twice. He was widowed very young. I'm not certain. I think he did have one child, and then ultimately had many, many children with a second wife. His second wife was the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eger. So Rabbi Akiva Eger from the town of Poznan or Posen, Germany, was one of the greats of one of the great European rabbis and leaders. And his son-in-law was the Chatam Sofer. So interestingly, we're talking about Moshe and Yitro, but here we're talking about Rabbi Akiva Eger. And the Eger is spelled E-G-A-R, and the Chatam Sofer. Now, the Chatam Sofer's last name, his name was Moshe, and his last name, we call him Sofer, but you know his real last name? I don't know if we ever talked this through. If his last name is that he signs or that he don't know is Sofer, his real last name was Schreiber. So some of his documents are signed Moshe Schreiber, and his son, Rav Shimon Sofer, was the rabbi of Erlau, which is a town in Hungary, which interestingly enough is known in Yiddish as Eger. So Rabbi Akiva Eger's grandson becomes the rabbi of the town of Eger, or of Erlau. And just interesting, I was reading up about Rav Shimon Sofer, and there's a fascinating interaction that he has Rav Shimon Sofer, that he has in the last years of his life in 1881 with Emperor Franz Josef I, when he comes to Krakow to visit, and Rav Shimon Sofer is the Rav of Krakow, and they have a fascinating interaction that's filled with great honor. And it's clear that meeting the emperor had a deep impact on this rabbi, to the point where even his tombstone, the epitaph was reflected the fact that he was respected by kings, and they clearly had a nice connection with the emperor. Anyway, this is a work was written and published around the time of the Chatam Sofer's death, immediately after, and it contains this 4-page introduction, which is written by his sons as a way of reflecting on their father's life. And there's a little link, if you want, just to see what the book looks like. There's a link in there to take a look at a scan of the book. So he writes about his father. So Rav Shimon Sofer writes about the Chatam Sofer. He says, Shamati mi piv hakadosh. I heard from his holy mouth. Miyom asher heichel lilmodin talmidim. From the time when he started to study with students, meaning from the time he was a young man and started to have some students. Lo avar alav yom bashana, not one day of the year passed. Shelo limed Torah barabim, that he didn't teach Torah publicly. Not one day passed where he took a day off from giving a lecture or from teaching a class. Chutz me Tisha B'Av. Other than Tisha B'Av, when you're not allowed to study Torah, that was the one day a year in which he did not give a lecture. There's we're not talking about Sundays. We're not talking about Saturday. We're not talking. Every single day of his adult life, he taught Torah in some way. Gam balel Yom HaKippurim. Also on Yom Kippur night, even. Hitasfu alav hadarim. Everyone would come and gather around him. V'limedotam seder avodat Yom HaKippurim. He would teach them all about the service on Yom Kippur. Bebeit HaMikdash, in the holy temple. Sheyibaneh bimheira bi'ameinu amen. That bet aleph bimheira bi'ameinu. Soon in our days, amen. He taught all about the service. Eila ezkara. These are the things I remember. V'eshpacha alai nafshi. And these are quoting the keynote on Tisha B'Av, quoting Lamentations. These are the things I remember, and I'm pouring out my soul. Ki haya gufo hakadosh, his holy body, midukeh b'yisurim, was stricken by pain, by suffering. The Chatam Sofer entering towards the last years of his life. And his illnesses he bore from the year of 1831. V'keshahaya goses, and when he was on his deathbed, samuch lemita, close to death, karalo eza talmidim, he called to him a group of students, va'amar lifnehem, and he said before them, chidushei Torah ideas. He called students around his deathbed so that he could share words of Torah. Leman lo ya'avor alav yom, in order that not one day would pass him by. Bali Talmud Torah de Rabim, without public Torah study, without teaching Torah. And just reading this description of the Chatam Sofer and reflecting on his, and then it goes on, and I cut off the copy here, but it goes on and on, kind of describing a little bit of his devotion to Torah study. It's really extraordinary, because he is internalizing. Where is this coming from? From a very deep notion that if we're here to do good, and good is defined as helping others, then my ability to teach Torah is the way in which I can bring good to the world. And taking that deep understanding of his own need and using that or projecting that on Moshe and saying, why in the world does Moshe want his non-Jewish father-in-law to join him on the schlep to Eretz Yisrael, to go into the land of Israel? What's he going to do there? So we could come up with explanations, but the Chatam Sofer's explanation is Moshe had an existential crisis. When we go to the land of Israel, it's going to be Olam HaTikun. It's going to be a perfected place. And that means no need to teach. As the prophet, as Jeremiah said, that means there's no one to teach. No more teaching. The Chasam Sofer, can you imagine what a terrible existence for the Chasam Sofer, his own self-reflection? What a terrible existence that would be. There's no one to help. There's no one to teach. There's no one to help grow. Yitro, bring along the father-in-law. Bring along his entourage. Bring along people who need to learn, and then life will be good. And then life will be able to do good. So that's the thought I wanted to share with you today, the Chasam Sofer's insight into why Moshe is bringing along his father-in-law and what that tells us about who the Chasam Sofer was as a scholar and a teacher. And that's it.
When did Yethro convert? Sorry, Peter.
It's a great question. When did Yitro convert? And actually, I was in the Chasam Sofer's comment on our Parasha, which I didn't look in. We didn't show his commentary on the Torah. We looked in different works of the Chasam Sofer. He addresses this as to the fact that Yitro converted, that this conversation is happening before the giving of the Torah. Perhaps there's a chance if we work out the chronology. It's very difficult to know the chronologies here because the Torah is not explicit with chronology, and the Torah is not written in order, in chronological order. So he converts, but the question is also going to be, did the conversion stick? Because it's one thing to convert while we're taking this walk in the wilderness. It's another thing to convert after the Torah and the laws have been given to the people. So it could be he converted, but it was like a lukewarm conversion because he still was going to have to go through a procedure after the Torah was given, because pre-law, what does a conversion look like? If you haven't been told what a mikvah is supposed to look like, if you know nothing about the mitzvah of Brit Milah, then how do you have a conversion? So it could be that this is all talking before the Torah. Yitro has already joined the people in a sense, but not officially and not formally. That'll only happen later.
I was curious whether Rabbi Hirsch commented on this situation.
I did not. No, I did not see a comment of I saw another beautiful comment of Rav Hirsch, but I looked at the amount of text I was bringing forward and realized that I will save that for our third time through, a file that will be called Behaalotecha 3. And
look forward to it.
It is filed away. Actually, there's a comment on the Chatzotzrot, on the trumpets, which but not on this particular section. I didn't see on this particular section. All right, we'll sign off with that. Thank you, everyone. So nice to see you, and we'll see you again next week in Yirtzeh Hashem.
Shkoach, be well, everyone.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.